You made the coffee at home this morning, you packed the lunch. You passed on the thing you wanted because it wasn't in the budget, and the budget was the rule, and you followed the rule, and you told yourself that was the discipline. That was the sacrifice that would eventually add up to something. And somewhere in the back of your mind, very quietly, was a question you didn't let yourself finish. When does the adding up actually happen? That question is what this is about. You've been told your whole adult life that the path to financial stability runs directly through the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Live below your means, spend less than you make. The advice is everywhere, from every direction, delivered with the confidence of something so obviously true it doesn't require examination. And you absorbed it, you built your financial life around it. You track the budget. You cut the subscriptions, you make the coffee. You do the things that responsible, financially aware people do, and you've been doing them for long enough that they're habits now, automatic, part of the identity you've constructed around money. And you're still not where you expected to be by now. Default tech's not behind in a dramatic way, not struggling, not in crisis, something quieter and harder to name than that. Just the persistent sense that the math should have added up to more by this point. The savings rate you've maintained, multiplied by the years you've maintained it, should have produced a number that looks different from the one you have. And you can't figure out why the arithmetic isn't landing right. You followed the rule isn't working the way it was supposed to. Think about the last 5 years. What did you give up? Not rhetorically, actually think about it. The vacation you didn't take because the timing wasn't right financially. The thing you kept putting off because there was always a better use for the money. The version of yourself you've been deferring because the financial picture needed to stabilize first and the stabilization kept getting pushed. You've been living the disciplined life, the below-means life. And the trade-off was supposed to be worth it, and you're starting to quietly wonder whether it is, and that wondering has a texture that feels uncomfortably like doubt. Because what if the advice isn't wrong? Exactly. But it's incomplete in a way that costs you, and this is where it gets interesting. Because living below your means is the correct baseline. It's not the trap is what the advice leaves out. The trap is what happens when you treat spending less as the strategy rather than as the precondition for the actual strategy. The trap is the decades spent optimizing the wrong variable while the real lever, the one that actually determines financial outcomes over a lifetime, sits unexamined because the conventional advice never pointed at it. Here's what conventional financial advice is built around: expense management. The assumption embedded in almost every piece of mainstream financial guidance is that the primary problem is spending too much, and therefore the primary solution is spending less. Budget more carefully, cut more aggressively. Find more ways to reduce outflow. And if you do that consistently, across enough time, the gap between income and expenses becomes your savings, and your savings becomes your security, and your security becomes your future. This model is not wrong, it is simply insufficient. And the insufficiency grows more expensive the longer you operate within it without understanding what's missing. The missing piece has a name, it's income. Not income optimization, not side hustles. Not the vague encouragement to find ways to earn more that personal finance content appends to every spending reduction tip as an afterthought. The specific, examined, strategic expansion of what you earn as the primary lever, not the secondary one, not the bonus round after you've done the real work of cutting back. The primary mechanism through which financial outcomes change. Because here's the math that nobody runs for you. The person who earns $60,000 and saves 20% saves $12,000 a year. The person who earns $90,000 and saves 15%, less disciplined by the conventional measure, spending a higher percentage of income, saves $13,500 a year. The person with the worst financial habits by the spending percentage metric is building faster, and the gap widens as income scales. There is a ceiling on how much you can save by spending less. The ceiling is your current income. There is no ceiling on how much you can build by earning more. Nobody taught you that the ceiling existed. You were too busy cutting expenses to notice the income lever was right there. The game changed and nobody told you. Here's what nobody tells you about money. The personal finance industry, the books, the podcasts, the budgeting apps, the influencers with the debt payoff journeys, and the frugality challenges, it was built for a specific kind of person in a specific kind of financial situation. The person who earns a reasonable income and loses the spread to lifestyle inflation, to unconscious spending, to credit card debt, to the soft accumulation of expenses that crept up over time. For that person, the message is right. Slow down, track the spending, close the gap. The advice is correct for the problem. But it became the universal advice, and a lot of people for whom the spending is not the primary problem have been applying the spending solution for years and wondering why the results are modest. Because when your spending is already disciplined and your income is the constraint, optimizing the spending further produces diminishing returns. You can only cut the coffee so many times. You can only find so much more to trim, and the anxiety of perpetual reduction, of living in a posture of financial restriction, always looking for what can be cut next, creates a relationship with money that is exhausting and often self-defeating. Because sustained deprivation has a psychological cost that eventually produces the spending rebound that erases the savings it built. The people who build real wealth, not the people who live frugally and accumulate slowly, but the people who reach a point where the money itself is generating meaningful momentum, they did not primarily get there by spending less. They got there by earning more and then spending a disciplined percentage of the more. The ratio matters. But ratio applied to a larger numerator is a different number than ratio applied to a smaller one. Let me tell you about a woman named Elena. Elena spent 6 years in aggressive frugality mode. She tracked every dollar. She used budgeting apps. She did the no-spend months. She meal prepped and canceled subscriptions and drove the car until it became unreliable and avoided lifestyle inflation with the discipline of someone who had read every personal finance book. At the end of 6 years, she had $41,000 saved and a deep exhaustion with the practice of restriction. Not with saving, with restriction, with the constant awareness of what she wasn't spending. With the way every purchase was filtered through a lens of whether it was justified. Her colleague Marcus, same job when they started, took a different approach. He spent 2 of those 6 years developing a skill set that made him worth more. He invested time and some money in becoming better at the thing the market valued in his field. He took the lateral move that nobody recommended because it increased his exposure. He negotiated harder at the 2-year mark and left for a better offer at the 4-year mark. He spent more than Elena during those 6 years. His savings rate was lower. And at year 6, he was earning $47,000 more per year than when they started. His savings going forward dwarfed hers, not because of superior discipline, but because the variable he had optimized was income instead of expenses. Elena had done everything right. She had just done it on a smaller number. But there's something darker underneath this. Because the living below your means trap has a psychological dimension that's harder to see than the arithmetic one. When restriction becomes the identity, when being the person who doesn't spend, who drives the old car, who makes the coffee, who says no to the thing, the restriction starts to serve the identity rather than the goal. You're not saving towards something, you're being someone. And being that someone requires continuous evidence of restraint. And continuous restraint, applied indefinitely without a clear endpoint or escalating outcome, produces a specific kind of quiet despair. The despair of the person who has been responsible for a long time and is still not free. That despair is not a character flaw, it's a signal. It's the feeling of optimizing the wrong variable for too long. Here's the first principle: the savings rate is a ratio. Ratios applied to larger denominators change everything. The common belief is that the savings rate, the percentage of income you save, is the primary metric of financial health. And within a given income, it is. A higher savings rate means more building. But the savings rate in isolation, without the income figure attached, tells you almost nothing about financial trajectory. 40% of $50,000 is $20,000. 10% of $200,000 is $20,000. The ratio is wildly different. The outcome is identical, and the person focused on improving their ratio at $50,000 while ignoring the income itself is optimizing a fraction while leaving the denominator unchanged. The identity shift is from I am a disciplined saver to I am a high earner who also saves well. Those are different people with different financial trajectories. The first person works on the ratio, the second person works on the numerator and then maintains the ratio. And across a decade, the second person builds a fundamentally different financial picture, not because they are more disciplined, but because they understood which lever actually moves the outcome. And what happens next is the part most people miss. Here's the second principle: every dollar of income growth, captured before lifestyle inflates to consume it, compounds differently than a dollar saved from cutting. This is the math that changes things. When you cut an expense, you save $1. That dollar can be invested and it compounds. But the expense is gone permanently. You've reduced your consumption baseline. When you grow your income and hold your spending flat, you save the increment. That increment also compounds. But you've done something different. You've created a permanent new savings capacity without reducing your consumption. The income growth, held and invested, is not a one-time savings. It's a recurring savings at a new rate, for as long as the income differential holds. The difference compounded over 10 years between someone who saves $800 more a month through expense cutting versus someone who earns $800 more a month and holds spending flat is not dramatic. The math is similar, but the person who cut has a reduced lifestyle and the same income. The person who earned more has the same lifestyle and increased income. And the next increment of income growth for the second person starts from a higher base. The compounding is not just on the saved dollars. It's on the capacity to save more as income grows. The people who reach financial independence in their 40s, and there are more of them than the financial media acknowledges, almost universally report that the turning point was not a spending breakthrough. It was an income breakthrough, combined with the discipline to not let lifestyle consume the increment. The restriction didn't build the wealth. The gap between growing income and held spending built the wealth. This is where it gets interesting. Here's the third principle. The frugality ceiling is real, and you may have already hit it. There is a point in the expense reduction project where further cuts produce negative returns, not diminishing returns, negative ones. The point where the reduction in spending creates friction, resentment, or deprivation that produces compensatory spending elsewhere. The point where the no-spend month ends in a rebound purchase that erases the month's savings. The point where the exhaustion of constant restriction affects your performance at work, your relationships, your capacity to pursue the opportunities that would actually grow your income. And the point where the psychological cost of maintaining the financial identity of the disciplined underspender is higher than the financial benefit of the dollars saved. That ceiling exists. It's different for every person, but it exists. And a lot of people have hit it and are pushing against it, spending enormous energy to maintain a savings rate that, at their current income, will produce a comfortable but not transformative financial future. And the energy being spent on the ceiling could be spent on the income, but the income work feels harder, less defined, less rewarded by the immediate positive feedback of a lower credit card statement. The frugality work produces visible results. The income work produces delayed ones. And delayed results are harder to sustain behavior toward, which is why the conventional advice leans so hard on the spending side, because you can feel the spending control immediately. In a way, you cannot feel income development for months or years, but feeling is not the same as building. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You've been optimizing for the feeling of financial responsibility rather than the outcome of financial growth. And those are not the same thing, and the gap between them has been widening quietly for as long as you've been more focused on what you don't spend than on what you earn. The discipline is real. The sacrifice is real. The intention is not in question. The strategy is. Every year you spend more effort on the spending ratio than on the income numerator is a year the ceiling stays where it is. And the ceiling is not where you want to end up. You know that. The number you're building toward, the one that produces the life you're doing all this for, requires either an extraordinary amount of time at your current income and savings rate or a different approach to the income itself. Project it forward at your current income and current savings rate. Where are you in 10 years? Be specific, run the actual number, and then ask, what does that number look like if your income grows by 30% in the next 4 years? Not from raises, from intentional skill development, positioning, and negotiation, and you hold the spending flat. The second number is not slightly better. It is categorically different, and the work required to achieve the second number is not more painful than the work you've been doing with the frugality. It's different work, pointed at the variable that actually scales. 5 years from now, you will either have started treating your income as the primary lever, or you will have made the coffee another 500 times and saved the $4.50 each time, and the total will be real and insufficient. Both futures are built one decision at a time. Only one of them changes the ceiling, so here's where you are. 2 paths, and the harder one is not more painful, it's differently painful. The first path is continuation. You keep the discipline. You keep the tracking and the budgets and the below means identity. The savings rate holds, the income grows modestly with inflation and tenure. The number gets bigger, slowly. In 15 years, you have something real to show for it. Not what you imagined when you started, but something. The restriction was worth something, just not everything you paid for it. The second path requires you to point the same discipline and focus you've been applying to your expenses at your income instead. To ask not what you can cut this month, but what you can be worth in 2 years that you are not worth today. To treat skill development, positioning, and negotiation as financial priorities the way you've treated budget line items as financial priorities. To stop spending your financial energy on the variable with a ceiling and start spending it on the one without one. The coffee savings are real, the income growth is realer. Which variable are you going to work on? That question has been waiting for you this whole time.